the world. Thank you. I was actually going to mention that. Energy wise, how you're doing, as well as like if you're feeling energetic, please also pop in the chat like anything that you're really excited about learning in this session or something that you're intrigued to know. But without further ado, this session will be recorded, as you just heard. So like if you are needing to dip in and out or you want to share it with fellow comrades, you can. This session is strictly for Black and people of color only, so that we have a space to discuss land and housing, which for a lot of us, we've historically and present daily been excluded from obtaining. So if you don't identify as this, but still want to support the work of Nourishing Economics, I'm going to pop in an email right here that you can do or you can use. Before I introduce myself, because you're probably thinking, who is this person in a cat hat talking at you? I'd love to introduce Guppy. She is one of the co-founders of Nourishing Economics and is also doing the tech for today. So it was the one that pressed record and yeah, is an all-round star. So I wanted to shout out Guppy. I also want to shout out Rax. They are the absolute mastermind behind pulling this whole session together. And yeah, we also want to shout them out for the incredible work that they do. They are also a community organizer, a DJ, and many other things. And so introducing myself, I'm Simone, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a community organizer at the London Renters Union. So I love all things community organizing and housing. So I'm really excited to be presenting today's session. I'm also a member of the Nourishing Economics Network. So that is how I know all of these gorgeous people that I've just introduced. And without further ado, I want to introduce Claude. Claude is waving. Hello, Claude. Claude Hendrickson is an accredited community-led housing advisor and land trust ambassador with over 2 decades of dedication to housing, social justice, and impactful project delivery. He was recently awarded an MBE for his contributions in the self-build and community housing sector and commissioned by Leeds City Council in 2015 to write a self-build 10-year strategy. Claude regularly runs workshops showing his expertise in identifying self-builders, securing funding, managing stakeholders, and overseeing the house building process. And like Claude and I know each other because we're part of the Nourishing Economics Network. And the Nourishing Economics Network over the year has been like having these retreats where all of us come down and talk about how we can build better economic futures, better futures in general. And a lot of that is tied to anti-capitalism. In fact, all of it. And so as a result of this, we're talking about like, how can we actually fund members of the community that are doing incredible work to come together and also impart this knowledge with the communities that we are in and like want to be in. And so this 3-part series is actually as a result of this Nourishing Economics seed funding. And yeah, like Claude is just incredible. I was on the 3rd and final retreat with Claude. And it's also really nice to be in an organizing space with people from the generation before us. It doesn't happen a lot in my spaces. And they have so much to offer and so much to give. And oftentimes there isn't a lot of intergenerational like spaces for us to do that. So I'm really, really glad that like we're now in this space where Claude can do this and has the resources and funding to also do this work. So yeah, that is kind of how this partnership came about. I don't know if you want to add anything to your introduction, Claude, before I go into the kind of format of the day. Want to say hello to everyone?
Is that me? You want me to say hello? Good evening.
Say hello.
Good evening. Good evening. Yeah, and I'd like to see more faces on the screen, you know.
Yes.
So we'll see how that goes. But I'm really looking forward to engaging in this session. Yeah, no, oh gosh, you're eating. I thought you'd be eating.
Love this.
We don't mind if you're eating, if you have to have your evening meal. Don't be shy, you know.
Please don't be shy. Thank you, Claude. And yes, as Claude said, would love to see some more of your gorgeous faces. I know it's after work. I know people are feeling haggard, but your faces are absolutely welcome here with your food and drink. Don't feel ashamed. So yeah, please do hop on. It makes the Zooms feel warmer and it doesn't make me feel like I'm on Zoom in 2020, talking to myself. So yeah, gorgeous things. Before we move on, I'd love to introduce the format so you kind of know what today is about. And before I hand it over to Claude as well. So to kind of like set the scene on today's session, we have like around 6 minute video that Claude has actually produced on his work and on like community built housing to kind of like set the scene of like what his work is, what we're trying to build. And I think, yeah, it's just a really lovely way to kind of understand what is going on. And then next, Claude will go into an introduction to the sector, followed by a history of community and land trust at self-builds. And then Claude will talk about his own journey project work, his own journey into this work. And then we'll have a bit of a discussion, a bit of a Q&A, and then we'll close. So that's kind of how today will run. And we are gonna load the 6 minute video now. So hang tight and let's watch it together. Would you like me to load this video or are you gonna do it, Gappy? I'm happy.
Are they gonna share my screen now?
Amazing, Claude's gonna share his screen, even better. Great. But I hope you all enjoy today and feel free to pop questions in the chat and we will get to them probably in the Q&A if there is time, which there should be.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And now I'm doing my presentation. You can eat. You don't need to switch off the screen if you don't want, but you can eat. Definitely enjoy your evening meal. As says, my name's Claude Hendrickson. I'm the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Associate to a number of housing associations across the country. I'm a community-led advisor. I'm the first Black male, and I think still only Black male accredited community-led advisor in the UK. And I'm also a community land trust ambassador. So thank you for taking the time out to come to tonight's session. It's very important for me to be sharing this platform with the generation that are the generation of now, the generation that have the future to deal with, you know. So I'm really proud and glad that you've taken the time out tonight to come to this session. As was mentioned, session 1 will be an introduction to community-led housing and community land trust. Session 2, which I just can't remember for a moment when that day is, we'll be talking about the process. And session 3, I will be hopefully setting it up to meet in person where you can meet some of the enablers. So session 1, introduction to community-led housing and land trust. I'm now hoping that I'm going to do this and it's going to work. So I'm going to set the scene. I'm going to show you a 6-minute video. So just sit back and take this experience in for those of you who haven't seen it before.
Can everyone see this?
My name's Randolph Martin. Supposed to doing a house a month. We're a bit behind. There's still a fair bit for us to do. It's just that we're worried about getting the shelves up before the winter. I don't know. I reckon we'll still get them up for October, end of October. Yeah, I reckon so.
12 of us are building our own houses. Most of us live in substandard housing or homes that are not our own. We've been trying to get the outside work done by December. The project was the vision of one local man, Claude Hendrickson.
It was all cobbled streets. It was atrocious. And this is what really drives me. In the mid-80s, we had streets and streets of houses blocked up. Empty.
Boarded up.
Doing nothing, whilst people were living 3 to a bedroom, 4 to a bedroom. And again, these were things that inspired us to get up and do the self-build. You're talking in maybe 20 houses, you're talking at least 8, 9 of them. Not like this, and turn the camera. You know, you talk about 8, 9 of them in disrepair like this. This was the tendency in nearly every single street within Chapeltown.
Last year, winter, this started happening. This is my flat, a typical example of the housing around the area. And I can't live here anymore. And it's not as bad now, but wait till the winter sets in again. All this is going to drop down.
My name is Michael Bent, one of the bricklayers for Frontline Self-Build. Today, Saturday, what we've decided to come in today and actually finish the gable end so that we can actually have it all ready, prepared for Monday morning. To me, Frontline is my life. We're doing a good thing for the community, not just in building houses, but to teach the young generation out there, if they want something in life, they can actually get that with hard work.
This is upstairs. Got all the studding, the door linings are in position. This will be the bathroom. And a lot of people have come in and says, it's a bit small, but I mean, as far as we're concerned, it's for us, you know. And I know Mike, I brought all my kids up here, and right now they're arguing about the bedrooms. I think I've got to sleep downstairs now. But I don't mind. It's mine, my house. I built it. The weather's not been too kind to us, but we've still managed to just keep up. I reckon I could still do it, depending on the guys. The other day it was raining, and then when I say it raining cats and dogs, and this guy was in the gutter, and I said, Mackie, tea time. And he said, Shorty, F the rain, let's get this trench dug. I mean, that's the kind of answer I'd like to hear. Comic Relief has given us the money to pay for Graham Gill. He's our site supervisor.
At this moment in time, we've been on site 6 months. We've put up the equivalent of 10 houses, which really, realistically speaking, for a self-build, it's better than any self-build that's ever gone before it. No other self-build has managed to do it as quick as this, or to the standard that this one's been done either. This is the largest group that I know of within Chapeltown region, 12 men working together, and I think the experience that they gain from this will help them to stay together, to form a cooperative and tender for work within the community.
Some of the people that are out of work right now, in a couple of years, we could be employing them ourselves and helping to solve the housing problem that we have in our community. You're not saying self-build can solve it, or we're not saying Frontline can solve the whole of it, but we're saying Frontline is definitely taking a step in the right direction.
My name is Tyson Thomas. My dad's name is called Thomas Cecil Thomas.
The youths out there, they don't really have much really to look forward to, because I never. Now it's our turn to show our generation what they can really do if they put their mind to it.
One love. What about a one heart? What about a let's get together and feel alright. As it was in the beginning. One love. So shall it be in the end. One heart. Alright. Give thanks and praise to the Lord, and I will feel alright. Let's get
If you could close that down, Rax. Okay, okay. Right. I'm trying to, I think I have to go back into share again. Is that right?
That is correct. Thank you for that, Claude. That was such a gorgeous film, as well as the soundtrack being 10 out of 10.
Well, it wasn't done by me. The soundtrack was done by the Red Nose people, because like it mentioned in the film, we got the funding to employ our site foreman from Comic Relief. So they made that film up for us. So yeah.
Love that. Thank you.
Okay, back on track. Again, thank you to all those who have got on a bit later on. For those that have seen the video, maybe with Decolonizing Economics with the group, they've seen it a couple of years ago. I hope you enjoyed that. But that's setting the scene. That is kind of showing you what can be achieved. And with that project, we laid something like 92,000 bricks, 52,000 blocks, 6,000 roof tiles. So we'll speak about that a little bit more, because having a decent and stable, affordable home is a key for people's health and detriment of people's health and well-being. And what I'm going to do now is take you through a little bit of some of the stuff. Like through every crisis, BME communities have been disproportionately impacted. Sharp edge of structural and systematic inequality. BME communities are more likely to suffer from homelessness, even though we don't talk about it. When it comes to homelessness, a lot of us do a lot of sofa surfing, going to aunties, going to brothers, going to other friends, sleeping on couches, sleeping on floors, that sometimes they don't think about Black people when they talk about homelessness, because we kind of spend a lot of time moving around before we actually hit rock bottom. For 4 decades, the struggle for BME communities, boistered by legalizers and statutory and regulatory codes, a bit of a mouthful for me this evening. From the 60s onward, and remember, I want you to remember, I'm a child of that first generation that came and settled in England. My mother came here in 58. I was born in the early 60s. And they failed to adequately and systematically confront racism, disadvantage, and discrimination in housing, even up to today, even in 2024. Poverty is increasing among BME groups, poorer housing outcomes occurring for these communities. And in the light of all that's been said about Windrush, you'll all hear the stories up and down the place, how inequalities are impacting. So with my story, I set out on the journey to do frontline self-build in 1988. It took up until we started on site 4.5 years, nearly 5 years later. We completed building the houses in 18 months and completed them towards the end of the middle of 1995. In 1996, I became one of the founding members of the Community Self-Build Agency, which was a national body which was lobbying for more community-led housing. And when I say community-led housing, sometimes you see the grand design and you think that's community-led housing. It's not. That is custom build. I'm talking about community self-build. In 2010, I was involved in supporting a number of ex-veterans self-builds in Bristol, because when it comes to homeless men, actually 60% of all the homeless men you see on the streets, even today, are ex-veterans, men that went into the army, went and fought for the country, but couldn't assimilate back into civil life. 2012, I became, for the records, the Community Self-Build Northern Director, because as well with self-build, a lot of projects have happened in the south of the country around Brighton and coming up down south, up to Watford Gap, for those that think the north ends at Watford Gap, but it doesn't, it starts at Watford Gap. And then in 2015, I was commissioned by Leeds City Council to write a 10-year strategy document, which I may talk about a little bit more in session 2. There's what was the cover of the Frontline booklet that we used to put out. There's the group I did the houses with. And this picture on the right is very much what the houses look like today, nearly 30 years later, still in pristine condition, still looking healthy, still not looking like they were done by self-builders, but actually they were. I'm also right now, and on the 18th of this month in London, we'll be launching some BME research. I was involved in raising the finance to do this research, to look at primarily the barriers for BME groups. So with this research, we have looked at how many BME-led projects have happened in the last 30 years, because we do have a history, and I'll come to that in a little while. Identify the barriers, but also whilst identifying the barriers, we want to talk up the opportunities. And when I say opportunities, for a new generation of people to get involved in the sector. We're going to deliver a report on how the sector operates. Again, that will be launched on the 18th of October in London, and we will share the information. So if any of you want to come to that launch, we'll share that with you. To highlight good practice examples, and there have been a number of good practice examples around the country. You saw our project in Leeds. There has been projects in Brixton. There have been projects in Birmingham. There have been projects in Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, which are not spoken about much, but they are examples. To produce a series of recommendations and an action plan. And I was just reading them recommendations and the action plan and the conclusion last night. So I'm really happy that we've got this document that we're going to launch, and to scope future funding options. And again, in the session next week, we'll talk about them funding options. Now I'm going to take you on a little, I suppose, a little journey. My real start in housing was in the 60s and the 80s, when, as I mentioned in the video, when our parents came to England from the Caribbean, they were put to live in I call them postally discriminated areas in Britain, in the big cities where the poor indigenous people were living. So these areas were locally postally discriminated against. So the housing stock within them areas was run down, desolate. And for me, that was mainly because they'd been badly maintained by local authorities and people who own the housing. Because houses, if you look after them, can last 2-3 generations. Some of the housing we're living in now, some people are living in now, were built 70, 80 years ago, but they've been well maintained. So dereliction was a sign. If you go into a postally discriminated area, you will see signs of dereliction, signs of disrepair, signs of poverty, signs of abandonment, and the people of them areas feel that we're signs of decay. So in the 60s and 80s, Britain, for all its love, the big cities were not very nice in certain areas. Then in the 80s, after the race riots of 1981, and I don't know if many of you will know of that time, but there were race riots, some major race riots in 1981 by Black and coloured people right across the country. They started in Bristol on, I think, something like the 5th of July, and it went through the rest of Britain. Leeds rioted, Manchester rioted, Leicester rioted. areas of London rioted. It went across the country. And one of the biggest issues we were rioting against as that first generation that were born here was coming of age was housing. We couldn't get housing, we couldn't get out, we couldn't get good jobs, but we couldn't get housing. So what was set up out of the riots of 1981 was housing associations were brought into these postally discriminated areas. And they also went about setting up Black housing associations. So in Leeds, we had a housing association called Unity Housing Association. Bradford had a Black housing association, Huddersfield, Manchester, Birmingham. In London, you had a number. In Ladbroke Grove, they had I think it was Notting Hill Housing Association, which was a Black housing association. In parts of London, they had housing. Birmingham had housing associations. So there was the creation of Black housing associations. And those housing associations formed a network called the Federation of Black Housing Associations, the FBHO, which was, for me, back then, going there as a young person was one of the strongest platforms for Black activism. So yeah, FBHO, which has now morphed into an organization that is called BME National, because a lot of them housing associations that did exist have now been retaken over by the bigger white housing associations, but there's still a number across the UK of Black housing associations, and they are members of the BME National. So if you Google BME National, you will find that Black housing associations. But also, back in the 70s and 80s, they were Black-led housing co-ops. That is not very much spoken about. They had a Brixton housing co-op, which was for the people of Brixton. So it was Black-led, but it wasn't just for Black people. The Fusion in London. Then they had where is it? Imani housing co-op in just at the bottom of Lewisham. And Khalid Mir he's still around. He's like me. He's out there telling the story, telling the history of cooperatives, housing cooperatives in the UK. And then down there on the left, you've got Nubian Way, which is down again in Lewisham, which was a self-build done down in the Lewisham around the same time that I was doing Frontline. They were doing them timber framed houses in Lewisham called Nubian Way, and they're still there if you ever want to go down and visit them. So Nubian Way, a young man called Tim Ashodi will, if you get in touch with him, he'll definitely take you around that project. I'm going to touch on Community Land Trust briefly, and then I'm going to come back to it later. But what I do want to let you know is that Community Land Trust, the modern day Community Land Trust, was started by the civil rights movement in the US. So around the Black Panthers and the times when Malcolm X was in the 60s, they started Community Land Trust in America, in America because Black people couldn't get access to churches. Black people couldn't get access to schools. Black people moving around America couldn't get access to business and couldn't get land. So what happened was land was betrothed to Black communities in the US, and they built their schools on that land. They built a church on that land, and they all started to build businesses on that land. So when it comes to land trusts can have multiple use, but when I come to that section, I'm going to talk about that. But I think it's important that we realize that the community land trust that is now in existence, modern days, came out at that time, and it swept across Europe. So you'll hear about land trusts in Amsterdam. You'll hear about land trusts in Holland. You'll hear about land trusts in France. You'll hear about land trusts in Portugal. All of that movement originates from the US. And then you'll hear about the Community Land Trust Network in the UK, which I'm one of the ambassadors for. But yeah, it's important that people of color appreciate, because also what I'd like to mention, whilst I mentioned that, in the Caribbean, in Africa, outside of the UK, in India, in other countries, being part of building your own home is a natural thing. It's in Britain. Britain has made building your own home something that they do for you, and you can't be involved in solving that issue yourself. Whereas in other countries, it is a big movement, and we're trying to make more of that happen in the UK. What I'm going to feature here in this picture is the Zanzili project in Bristol, which happened in 1985. And actually, the Zanzili project was my inspiration. This was the project that inspired me to do Frontline, because I heard about a group of young men in Bristol that built a block of flats called Estelle Park. And I went and visited them again last year. So these pictures are the color ones are from last year. And Chris Gordon, it was an honor for me to go and sit down and speak to him after so many years. But yeah, he wrote this book. He was the co-author of the book about self-build way back in the early 90s. So that's Zanzili. What I'm going to do now is, before we go to the next session, I'm going to hand you back because it's time for a break. Hello, where are you?
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Claude. That was so incredible. And I've just been typing away at my laptop. One thing that came out of the chat is, if you have Tim Oshodi's contact details by any chance, if you could pop it in the chat, that would be great. But yes, thank you so much for this first part of it, because yeah, it's so cool to see so many co-ops. I think like getting the money and the land for co-ops has really become stringent. So it's so cool to see like historical and present day examples of it. But without further ado, we actually are on a break for about 10 minutes, I believe. So if everyone could come back for I'm going to say 6:21, so it gives people a minute to really settle in before we go off at 6:22. That would be ace.
Yes, welcome back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. I'm just trying to find out where I've gone. Here we are. Right, everybody back? Can you see that slide?
Yep.
I'd like a response, some thumbs up there. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. You can see the slide. Thumbs up, thumbs up. You've all had something to eat and drink. Thumbs up. Okay. I've put Tim's details. A couple of you asked me for Tim's details in London, so I've put them in the chat. Okay. We get on to I suppose, the information side rather than the historical side. What I would say is community land trust, even in the UK, has existed for a while, has always existed in one form or the other, but it's in principle done by select groups of people. And historically, I know they don't like me to say this, but Khalid gave me a name for them. He called them the Woolly Jumper Brigade. And that is usually by white, middle-class, educated people in the UK, usually do community-led housing and land trust projects. That is how it has been in the past. We have a strong, growing, educated Black network of young people now that I hope are going to do them in the future. Simi is one of them people. How you doing, Simi? Okay, let's get back. Community-led housing is nothing new, as I mentioned. And the key and core types of self-build are custom build, which I mentioned earlier. Is custom build is when you watch TV and you see the grand design, where you see some person with money that can get land and build their own fantastic house. Footballers do custom builds, and actors and rich people do custom build. So community self-build is the other one, which is done by groups of people coming together. But you also have some people, for example, who are architects, who are quantity surveyors, who are in the housing fraternity as architects. They also sometimes get money and build this a self-build. There's a plot of individual self-builds in Milton Keynes. I remember when that happened 25 years ago. Near Oxford, they've got a project called, oh gosh, it's just gone from me, Grantham or Graveney, and they've got a number of different self-builds, and we'll start passing some information, because what I'd like to do maybe with the economizing economics, we go and do a couple of visits to some of the sites. It's maybe something I can speak with Guppy and the team and Nom and the team about, maybe going and taking a couple of visits to some projects. Housing co-ops is another option, done by the Confederation of Cooperative Movement, and UK co-housing. UK co-housing is one of, whoops, go back, where are you going? Co-housing is a big one that is happening now. We've just had one finished in Leeds, a co-housing project, which finished, I think it's been open a year. They built 29 houses. One of these times, hopefully I can get a visit and we'll go and visit that. And community land trusts. Community land trust is another strand. And community land trust can be about getting a piece of land, but that land could have multiple use. So that land, and I'll speak about it a little later, that land could have some housing on it. I'm working with a project now that is a football pitch. So they've got football pitch, they've got a cricket ground. They now want to, on one part of it, they want to build some houses, but they also want to build a bit of an allotment. So on that one piece of land, they're going to do all of them things. So when you think about community land trust, it's not necessarily just about one thing. The importance of self-help, improved housing conditions, more housing, cost reduction. Right. Types of community-led housing. Community-led housing is pick and mix. And one thing I'd say to everybody, no project in principle is the same. So not one size fits all. So don't, because you saw Frontlines project, which was a group of unemployed young Black men, we did try to have some women in it, but they kind of fell off. They didn't stick with it. So, and different projects are made up by different people. So the beauty of it for me is you can see and visit many projects, but you'll design a project for yourself. And even when those of you on this call are going out, I hope, promoting community-led housing to other people that may be part of your networks. One size doesn't fit all, and it's important that, because no projects are the same. Community-led housing can be, stop moving, I don't want you to move yet. I'm just pressing that. Community-led housing can be adapted and molded to create solutions that remedy a particular issue and factors faced in your community. Community-led housing can come about from a number of reasons in different ways. And I do that because, I say that because people can be motivated by different reasons. We will cover the most common ways as we go along in the next session, but let's move on. What is community-led housing? Community self-build, community land trust, housing cooperatives, co-housing, tenants management organizations as well, self-help housing and community development trust and community anchors. So, and again, in next week's session, I'm going to go through a bit more of them. Co-housing approach. What is co-housing? Co-housing approach is creating of a community. It's often referred to as intentional community. It is really just that people wanting to live together in a certain way. So for example, you could have people that are artists that want to create a project that homes artists, and they all want to work together and continue to work together into the future. Co-housing is coming together to build a neighborhood that embodies particular values, so that the group create the values that they most adhere to and kind of wrap around that idea. These values are generally linked to a shared vision for living. Co-housing is a balance between privacy and community, because with co-housing, as you're going to see in the next slide, with co-housing, they have common areas, but you still have your privacy. So it's a balance between privacy and community. Most developments with co-houses are usually between 10 and 40 houses. The one in Leeds that just happened was 29 housing. Residents make the decision based on consensus. And this is an example of what a co-housing project could look like. So what you'll see is there's the housing round the back. They've got an allotment there. They have a children's area. They have a common house. And with co-housing, a core thing with co-housing is they have this common house. And this common house is used for, it's a communal place. So if anybody in the housing wants to have a birthday party, if they want to book it for meetings, it can generate income for the group because they can book it out for meetings. It has a community kitchen in there, so once a month can be the set. Once a month you could get together for a meal, or it could be once a week where everybody comes together for a meal. They have parking off-site, so within the site, no cars can come into the site. They have, like the project in Leeds, you don't pay individual electricity bills. What you do, you pay your bills to the central source, and they pay the electricity and the gas board and the water board. You don't have individual bills. And they also have things like, instead of every household having a washing machine and a dryer, what they do in the common house, they set aside a space where there's washing machines and dryers, and everybody, you can use them. But if you still want to have your own dryer, your own washing machine, you can. So this is a kind of example of what a co-housing set out is like. Co-housing has been a big focus for communal living. It's different, and it is different from a commune. Sometimes people say, oh, you're doing a co-housing, you all know each other, you're getting together, you're creating a commune. No, it's not. Residents have their own home, which is surrounded by shared spaces where people can meet, eat together, and share resources. Co-housing is not about forcing people to eat together every night and imposing strict rules. Residents decide when and how they interact. So you might decide it's once a month or once every 2 weeks that all the residents come together. A lot of co-housings in recent times have been pushed towards the older generation. So you find out in rural areas, like in between the big cities, out down south more, Cornwall, Brighton, those kind of places. Co-housing is a big thing, but a lot of older people come together because what they realize as people get older, loneliness and social isolation has increased, and in communities, as people get older, maybe living closer and around people that are the same age as you works, because obviously it gives you a longer life. So co-housing is definitely on the rise. It's the model that is probably being more promoted than any other model. And there's quite a few co-housing projects around the country. Right, let's go on to community land trust. A community land trust is a non-for-profit organization. It's made up of community members. And to get a real understanding of community land trust, a lot of the times, and as I mentioned earlier, in England, they talk about buildings. People all say, oh, we're going to get this building to have our organization in, but they're not looking at the land that surrounds the building. So for example, they may have a car park. An example of this is churches. Churches are one of the biggest landholders in the UK. And when people see a church, they actually see the building, but they're not taking into account the actual land that surrounds that building. And the church owns a lot of the time all of that land. And they can even own some of the houses that are adjacent to that land. So when we talk about community land trust, we talk about land. Now, with a piece of land can have multiple uses. So for example, as I've spoken before, on a piece of land, you could build some houses. You could build have an allotment where people grow their own food. You could have a day center for elderly people. You could have a day center for young people. You could even have a school on that land if the land is big enough. And when you talk about community land trust, it's not just about land. You can talk about a local pub as a land trust, because when you go to the local pub as well, you see the pub as a building, but there's car parking all around that pub. That land actually is all part of the pub. So therefore, you could, if you took over an old pub, a rundown pub, you could build some houses on the car park, for example. So when you talk about land trust, it's not just about land. It can be about shops. It can be about big derelict buildings that have car parks, because you're taking the building and you get the car parking space as well. Nature walks, some groups have created land trust and turned them into nature walks, or building workspaces. So you can have a group that takes control of some land, because some groups, and I'll mention this, some groups want buildings, but they don't want the responsibility of managing or maintaining the building. They just want space. So with community land trust, you create an organization that owns the land, and then it sublets it in principle to other people, but then people cannot own the buildings that you give them. And I'll take questions later on that, because community land trusts are very interesting. How does it work? For the community land trust is the mission, to simply create something. It's to make sure it's of real benefit to the community for the long term. So when you take over a piece of land, you might get that land. Somebody might give you that land. The council may give you a lease on that land for 100 years, 200 years, 999 years. But that land cannot be sold. It cannot be given away. If anything, it has to be given back to the council. So put very simply, illustrated nicely by the next page. So this is how a land trust is, as it is. CLTs acquire the land by buying it on a long-term by buying it or getting it on a long-term lease. Some pieces of land can be gifted. Some farmers in the past have gifted out pieces of land to people. The CLT, the Community Land Trust, then oversees the development, for example, of what happens on that land. So some housing, some businesses, some play areas. When the homes are complete, for example, if there's homes on it, they are part of the land trust and the CLT remains the steward. So people cannot own these houses outright. They cannot sell these houses to other people. If anything, they have to be sold back to the CLT. So it's not like building a house for profit. And it's illustrated across here. Subcontractors, custom builders, architect project, they build. And the CLT provides homes that are genuinely affordable to rent and to buy and will remain affordable for as long as they're in existence. The CLT remains the long-term steward of the land, the houses, and the assets. So the individuals that live there get really decent rents. They get, the houses are well looked after, well maintained. So that's the kind of whistle-stop version of a land trust. Yeah, we'll move on. What's my timing? Okay, 20 to 7. Okay. CLT builds home that everybody needs and can afford. It's a radical approach to how they calculate the rents. There's a radical approach to how they calculate the rents and the sale prices. When they say sale, some people can come into a community land trust and say, well, I've got a bit of money. I can put in, let's say, £20,000. That will reduce in a big way the rent that they pay. Trying to cost what local people earn, or you're tying the rents to what local people earn means living costs can be dramatically reduced. So yes, so with community land trust, and the same could be said of cooperatives, and the same could be said of co-housing, that the rents are kept at such a decent level that they're not, you know, you just look at the rents for a 1-bedroom flat now, especially for you guys in London. So yeah, so the rents will be kept affordable, right, for forever, into perpetuity, forever. This is not that current residents that benefit from the lower housing costs. Asset lock means that affordability is legally protected. So it's legally protected. Cannot be sold for inflated profits. Any extra money that the CLT earns or raises must go back into the pot to be used to the community benefit. So with CLTs, you will raise money from collecting rents, but it has to be used to maintain what is part of the CLT, and any money can go into community activities. Cooperatives, as I mentioned, for me, cooperatives are the, oops, somebody's wanting to enter. Cooperatives, for me, are actually the umbrella of all that I've mentioned that has gone before. Because for me, cooperatives means that people come together to solve a specific issue. So all of these other, whether it's self-build, whether it's co-housing, whether it's community land trust, in a fashion, they're all cooperatives to me, in the sense that it's a group of people that come together around an issue and say, we're going to solve this issue together. But so cooperatives, non-for-profit, and many of you know, democratic organizations run by their members. They can have large properties, large developments where people live collectively in individual homes, but in close proximity, where, and I like this, where residents rule the roost. Cooperative movements values are deep-rooted, as many of you will know. They are self-help, self-responsibility, self-democracy, self-equality, equity, and solidarity. When these values are related to housing, it means residents are in control. They self-manage their homes in a democratic way. Residents have security and residents will pay fairer rents. So for me, cooperatives, and I'm part of, just for those of you that don't know, I'm part of the 4 Million Homes program, which is trying to empower residents to take more control or to have a voice with their landlords. And again, next week I'll speak a bit more about 4 Million Homes. Bam. Boom, boom, yes. The community in question is made up of people living together. And remember, with cooperatives, it's strictly for, everything is strictly limited to members. So you have to become a cooperative member, and then you can get residency in there. The cooperative approach works both ways. It can be for renting and it can be for buying. So it's two-pronged, it's two-sided, the cooperative movement. It's not all about just keeping rents down. You can actually buy houses or buy buildings at a cheap rate. The cooperative approach can be used in various ways, where residents own properties and properties as a collective by paying into one mortgage. So as a cooperative, you all contribute to the one mortgage the cooperative has. So they'll work out what the monthly payment is on the full cooperative, and you will pay a percentage of that. Where residents are both tenants and landlords. One of the things that's becoming very evident now is students have been money spinners for many years. And what you see now is student housing cooperatives becoming a big thing, created in universities, towns. So what you find is that university students are setting up housing cooperatives, and even when they move on, the cooperative is set up. So other students come in and take over that cooperative, and it keeps the rents down for students as the years go on. So you'll notice, those of you that are just completing may have lived in some student cooperatives. I don't know, maybe that's something that'll come out in the talk later on. But student cooperatives are a big thing that's happening in the system. Nearly every city that you go into right now, they are building student housing. Leeds has got a hell of a lot of student housing. I was in Birmingham the other day, a lot of student housing. Yep, so next slide. Now you're down to my thing, self-build. Many community-led housing projects revolve around new housing, that's building new houses. Sometimes another approach to securing housing, which is to refurbish properties, and they've got a program called Empty Homes, where you have some people who have had properties for years, and there's properties stood in some communities, and you may have passed the property and think that's really derelict. Why is it stood there? Why is nobody doing nothing on that property? And that's because somebody else owns it and they're not fixing it up. So that's an option as well. And I think the next slide I'm going to talk about the two-pronged approach to empty homes. Provides a range of opportunities for hands-on involvement and self-build, like I did with a group of unemployed people, where they actually get involved in building the houses themselves, getting construction skills that'll make them more employable, getting knowledge of the housing process, building process, which means they'll be able to help maintain the house that they live in. It's sometimes thought as really the only option for inner cities. And I do believe that certain inner city situations can benefit from self-build, because what it does, it gives people the option to take control of not just running the houses, but actually building them and maintaining them. In fact, there are properties lying vacant around the country. You see, they're saying there's nearly 200,000 long-term vacant resident properties in England. And in Leeds, we've got a number of projects, a project called Latch, a project called Canopy, where they take control maybe on a 15-year lease. And I'll go to that now, because self-build and self-help are kind of, they go hand in hand. And bam, come on, next one. No, yeah. Yeah, okay, let me do it this way, yeah. So there are properties that housing projects can get, and they get them from the owner on a lease for 15 years. You renovate that building and you collect all the rent to make back your money for 15 years. Then after 15 years, you hand it back to the owner. And I was in London the other day, I mean, and where I was, I saw a couple of properties that were kind of just sat there derelict. And they're the kind of properties that you need to then identify the owner, then go and meet the owner, see if the owner will transfer it to you. It's a long process, but it can be done. If you build from scratch, when it comes to building or renovation of your properties, there is the conventional way and the not so conventional way, as in community self-build, and not to confuse this with the grand designs that I've mentioned before. They also have a process that's called self-finishing, where you can take on a self-build project where a main contractor builds the most of the house for you, puts in the toilet and things like that, but you do all the painting and decorating, you do the plastering, you finish it off, but they do the hard, the wiring, they do all the main plumbing, and you do the finishing, which actually saves you money, and can be discounted from the final price of the house. So you might see a developer building homes now, and if you go in there and say, well, we'll take on the finishing of this house that I'm going to purchase, it will get it to you for a cheaper price. Right, we're coming to it, because I'm aware that my time is going. Okay, hired contractors. Many projects you'll see around the country, like in London, they just had a co-housing project called Russ built. Many of you might know of it in Lewisham, where they hired a contractor, like a normal housing association would hire a contractor to come in. They pay them, they build the houses for them, and then at the end of it, they take control of the houses themselves. There's also a version of, like, you can have subcontractors. You can have a main contractor, but you may know a local joiner, or you may know a local electrician that you want to be part of that work. So you can go in and negotiate with the main contractor to let local businesses and local building firms take part of that money. So some of the money for building them houses stays within your community. There's another way of having houses built from scratch, which is housing associations. And if you do decide to go on this journey, you're going to hear a lot about RPs, and RPs are registered providers. So a housing association is a registered provider. That means they're registered with Homes England, they're registered with the building organizations, and they are RPs. Some groups choose to become an RP. It's a long process, but again, that's something I'll tackle next week in next week's session. Housing associations have a long-standing relationship with contractors and expertise in this area of work. So some groups see a benefit. So some groups decide we're going to work in partnership with a local RP housing association to deliver our project, because we don't have the knowledge. We don't have an architect, we don't have a quantity surveyor, we don't have a development department. So what we'll do, we will work with a local housing association to deliver our project. Empty Homes Program, and which I mentioned before, which is a two-pronged approach. Purchase and refurbishments, which I talked about, where you can purchase those houses or buildings from people and refurbish them yourself. Or the second option is as I said, you have standing properties in areas that have been stood for a long time. And what you can do is you can get a lease from the owner that owns that property. You get the money, you refurbish that property, then you have that property for 10 to 15 years. You collect the rent from that, and then after that, you can either hand it back to the person who you got the property from, or you can purchase it outright because they may decide that you've done such a good job on it that they want to sell it to you. And many times groups can access properties from the local authority, housing association, and sometimes to renovate them, you can get them on a peppercorn rent. So you have them for 15 years, but you pay the housing association or the local authority a peppercorn rent. So you really make all of the rent income that is coming off of that. This could be an option where there's no funding available to purchase properties, that is getting it on peppercorn rent, and where group wants to get up and running. So some groups will use local authorities to get the first couple of properties because they get them on peppercorn rent, and then as they develop as an organization, they then kind of start getting their own loans. Yeah. Ooh. As well as using resident properties, there's no reason why other buildings can't be used. So for example, you're going to hear a lot over the coming years about shopping centers, high street shops, commercial buildings being used to create housing. I've noticed that in Leeds that the high street in town is now given over a number of properties to be created for housing. So don't just think of housing outside of city centres. You can look at shops and buildings within city centres, such as redundant pubs. I've noticed around the country there are lots of pubs closing down. They can be seen as an ideal building for developing housing. Offices, you can notice after COVID that a lot of people are working from home. So offices are being made available and can be used to create new accommodation. Right, we're going to now have I'm going to hand back to Simone.
Thank you, Claude, and thank you for the second installation of this workshop. Just gorgeous, and like, I didn't know there were so many differences between the different forms of housing. So that's so cool to know. And I think I know so many people that are in co-ops, but I never knew how they started, and what they actually mean, and like the histories of starting. So that has been so helpful. We're going into our second/final break. And after the break, actually, so you've heard a lot of information, both, from Claude. We've had like a video today. We've had some examples of co-ops, as well as the more technical backgrounds of different forms of community housing. So in this last third of the workshop, we're going to be thinking, it's actually handing it over to you guys in the audience. We're going to be thinking about why we aren't seeing any more POC-led housing initiatives, and have a sort of conversation about that. But I want to leave you with that question so you can have a think over the break, as well as a Q&A. So it will all be us chatting together, and also it's an opportunity for you to ask Claude some things. But yeah, you have a break now for another 10 minutes.
Oh,
Can I? Yes.
Hello.
Hello, how are you, Sim?
I'm good. How are you, Sim?
Good,
No,
I'm good.
Thank you so much for hosting this. It's been really nice. Just want to say thank you. Can you remind me what time this event ends?
It ends at 7:30.
Okay, cool. So we're going for another half an hour after this break.
Yes. No,
right, I will see you
that's a
around.
great question. No worries. If everyone could come back by 7:10, that would be great. I know we've received a lot of info, so please make sure you look out of a window, get some water, get a drink. But see you all at 7:10. And yes, enjoy your break. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the final third. I hope the break was good. I hope you got some time to decompress, to eat, as I'm seeing some people do on their screens, drink. But we are at the final bit of this gorgeous workshop, and we're kicking it off with a discussion. So how this will run is we'll most likely either take wording, questions or comments from the chat if people don't have their camera on, or if your camera is on, maybe use the raise hand function to indicate you want to say something, just because there's so many of us on this chat and we don't want loads of people to unmute at the same time. But I thought we could kick off with the question, which I'll post in the chat. But why do you all think that there have not been more POC-led housing initiatives? And that in the chat as well.
And that's by BME minority groups.
I'm on mute. Thank you, Claude. So that is BME, Black ethnic minority, or people of color led housing initiatives. Or for some people also go by BPOC, which is Black people of color. I'm seeing a hand by Dawn.
Hi, everyone. Can I just say thanks for creating this space? It's just really nice to see these discussions happening. Yeah, so I'm Dawn. I'm based down in Hastings, and I work for an organization called Black Butterfly. One of the things it's interesting, and it's really good that Claude always goes back to tell a little bit of the history of these different housing programs. It's partly that there were lots of them before. It was kind of our means of resistance, especially in the Black community, especially in this country, of those sort of Windrush kind of communities. And I think then there was a time when it was, where people, I guess, were led to believe that actually the system's changed, everything will be fine, let's all come together, right on, we're with you. And everyone thought that was fine, but as Claude has mentioned, whenever there's like some kind of emergency, some kind of big struggle, another type of race riot, another like COVID, things emerge and we realize actually we're still in the same position that we were in before. I think historically there are so many communities that do this naturally. Outside of these systems, they would, as Claude mentioned, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in parts of Asia, South America, it's what we do. Circles of community care, we do things together. But within these systems, these structures, there are always the barriers and the reasons, and we have to look at those. What are the things stopping and limiting people from doing it? It's not just that we're not sharing the information as widely or being as visible, but it's also the systemic barriers, the financial exclusion, which is constant. That struggle is real, and which is why it's beautiful to see what, Nourishing Economics does and others like that. But I think we need to amplify the work that people are doing. We need to honor that legacy without kind of any sense of jealousy or anything like that. Like, we just need to tell that story, which they do so well in America. But we also need to break down all of the different barriers that are limiting different groups, especially for young people. Like, young people are the ones that we really need to do it, because you have a stronger voice and you don't worry like some of the older people that, we might lose something. We might not, we shouldn't do it because, we might kind of come down from whatever positioning we've got. I think that's why I love supporting young people, because I'm like, do you know what? Whether you're young people or older people feel like we can say whatever, we've been there, done that. Young people are like, let's just do it, we don't care. And I love that, because we need more of it. We need people to keep pushing and making noise while the other people are there also trying to work out how do we support, how do we create the right systems, the alternative paths. So I think there are lots of people doing the work, but we just need to see them. And as someone mentioned before, we should be going and doing these tours and visits of different places and hearing from the people who've been there and done the work.
Thank you so much for that, Dawn. Like, I think that's really gorgeous, because it's only in these sort of spaces that we do get to access this information. And it's so crazy, because this is actually the way that Black and brown people have been resisting for centuries, but also decades in this country. And it's not easily accessible information. So it feels like, for example, maybe us starting co-ops feels like a new thing, when in reality, it's actually been a long tradition of like housing justice and housing resistance. And like, people are echoing what you've said in the chat. So like, I'll just read out some people. So Nahal was saying that like, hard to find each other in a lot of places. Also, people struggling quite a lot to survive. So hard to find time to learn together, wondering what's needed. So yes, a lot of us are like separated from our communities now. Also thinking about like gentrification and displacement, a lot of the communities that we do know in like Lewisham and Brixton and Deptford and Hackney, where a lot of these co-ops have been in the past. Many of those people have been priced out or don't live there anymore. Sharan said, not seeing examples until I saw this. I didn't think it was possible, for example, Nubia Way. So similar to what you were saying as well, Dawn, that like, if we're not seeing examples, we don't know these things exist, it's hard to work towards something you can't necessarily see, even though we're all about imagination work in this group, or at least I hope we all are. It's a lot easier to imagine when you've got an example. I wonder if anyone else has more to say, if they want to put their hand up. I'm also just reading things in the chat as well. Rosita, I can see you.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. I do community engagement for a development team in a local authority, and getting to see the actual community-led stuff is amazing, because it's what like I'm working with every day at work, but not actually getting to see it really happen. It's all developer-led, or the council just doesn't have the money to be able to give over to communities, or there's like this idea of like risk, not it being too risky, or like, oh, we've got to like scramble and make these deals, and you're getting like however many houses it is, but like people are still making like millions of pounds off of these projects and whatever. And I think maybe that's what it comes down to when we're self-organizing as well. Like, are you actually having to be at work 5 or 6 days a week, or whatever it is, and not having the mental, physical, financial resources to take a risk and organize and do it together? Whereas actually, if someone gets a lucky break and they get their mortgage, owning your own home and doing it in the conventional way, it seems like it's more stable and it's the safer option. You know, like if I told my mum I was going to join a housing co-op, she'd probably yell at me and tell me I was throwing all my money away, you know, and like that kind of thing. I think is like one of the biggest barriers, is that like perceived sense of risk and confidence in being able to take alternative solutions.
I'm seeing a lot of nods. Thank you, Rosita. And I think you touched on a really, really important point, that like for a lot of us who are Black and brown, the security, especially in the UK, isn't there. Like our parents, a lot of people encourage us to go for the most secure option that we can hold for ourselves as individuals, and like that sense of like community trust, that we can like hold each other, we can live together communally as well, has sort of been broken down. And also thinking about like, where do we even get this money from? So for a lot of us, we don't have inheritances. We are more than likely the generation that is meant to make it out of the mud, if that makes sense. Like our parents have come over, they have sacrificed a lot and done what they needed to do, and it's for us to, you know, continue the schooling, go and get English education and employment, and like earn the money to really start securing ourselves in this country. So it's like trying to both secure yourself and spread yourself over quite risky projects just doesn't feel good for both individuals and the people that we're in communities with. So that makes a lot of sense, as well as, you know, having access to guarantors and stuff like that. Like, you know, you might take the risk, but maybe for a white person that's well established with inheritance, there's somewhere to get that money from, somewhere to fall back on. Whereas with us, it's like you take that risk and it fails, it's not looking good. So like really, really brilliant to add. And a lot of people were agreeing. I'm going to swing it over to Claude, who has his hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, had I not been able to take those guys that did Frontline to Bristol to visit the Zanzili project, they may not have believed it, because sometimes people need to see things they can touch and feel, and the theoretical thing is a barrier. And another thing I wanted to mention was, these projects were happening in the 70s and 80s, but because there was no social media, there was no way. So if somebody did a project 200 miles away in London, we wouldn't hear about it because there was no kind of network. But now there's social media. Now there's a platform that we can share this information. And that's what this generation needs to appreciate, that there is, we can have this Zoom meeting tonight and we're all in different places, but we can come together around this issue. So the fact that social media has created this platform for sharing information is a key thing. And the third thing I would add to that, on what Rosita said, was that when your mom appreciates for every pound invested in a community-led housing project, society actually benefits £7 because of all of the other things. So if it's financial, and what I would also say, because we've always done it this way, doesn't mean that it has to remain this way. And that's the problem. You know, I often use the term Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble, you know, where certain people lived in the Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble era, but we live in the Matrix and Neo's era, where things can be done different. And community-led housing is a different. It's just, all it is, it's still housing, it's just done a different way. So yeah, I wanted to raise them 3 points. And I do have some others to come back in the chat of some people were asking things. I don't know if you want me to hit that one now or wait until you finish this conversation.
Do you know what? We can take one more from Phoebe and then we can go back to you, Claude, and also open up the Q&A, which would be great. So I'd love to hear from Phoebe, and I'd also like to say thank you to everyone in the chat. Some really brilliant points in there as well. Yes, Phoebe, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, thanks so much for this presentation. And also, I don't want to take up space with quite a specific question about a particular struggle that I'm involved in, if there's a more appropriate forum for it and maybe later sessions. But first off, I'll say that I work at the Pan-African Cinema Archive, and we actually screened Nubia Way with the Stockwell Community Centre recently, and I'm really glad to have been introduced to Frontline Community Self-Build, and we'll definitely put on another screening of that film with the community. And then I'm currently a tenant in a building that is in the process, well, it's been in a long process of a kind of struggle with the landlord to hopefully get the landlord to give up or sell the property because their misconduct and allowing the building to go into disrepair. So more or less so that then redevelopers can come along and just tear it down and build something new. But because it's a listed property, we have some leverage we've been speaking to people in heritage, and what we'd really like is to kind of move the building into community hands. And we're looking at kind of community land trusts as a potential model. But in your kind of introduction to the different types of housing models, community-led housing models, I was wondering if you know of many instances of a community land trust where there's already a building on it and it's about getting that into community hands. Yeah.
Claude, I wonder if you can hop in here, or anyone.
As regards community land trust, like I said, there is a community land trust network that you can, if any issues that you've got, you could always send them an email, and they have all of the experience of different land trusts, because like I said, all the land trusts are different, but they have a pool of resources that can solve your issue. So I would contact, go online, send them an email, and with any issues. Yeah, you okay with that, Phoebe? Yeah, okay. Quickly, because I'm aware that we're gonna, somebody had put in the chat that Chaco have 33 families, not 29. Yes, Chaco built 29 houses, and I think it was 3 flats. So 3 flats, they're for rent, but they've got 29 houses. That's why they have 39 families. And one of the houses that is for rent is actually for students. So in that one house, I think there are 5 students. So when it says 33 families, it's because some of them are in the rented accommodation, and then they've got the 5 students in that student house, because that's a way of them raising income. And that was to Sinead. Yeah, Sinead, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I think it was just following on because people were wondering which co-op you were talking about, and I was guessing it was Chaco.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Thanks for clarifying.
Let's have a look quickly. If there was anything specific challenges, like when communities take them at extreme finance. I think the system always tells you it's going to cost more. If we'd have not believed in what we was trying to achieve, we wouldn't have built our houses. You know, it wouldn't have happened. I live in a city in Leeds where there's 23,000 people on the housing waiting list. Some of them are going to be on the housing waiting list for the next 10 years because there isn't the properties. So therefore, you know, it's a status quo. And what I say to everybody, yes, and let's get one thing straight, building your own housing project, getting your own land, it doesn't happen in 6 months. It takes a period of time. There is a period of time. It used to take, Chaco, for example, just to give you an example, with Chaco that just finished, it actually took Chaco 11 years. I met with the people that were talking about Chaco back in 2010. They came to me to ask me for some advice. The council messed them about with land, messed them about and planning permission, that it took them 11 years till they actually completed, but they've actually done it. And I believe going forward, it will take less time. So yeah, Miriam, you've got a question?
Hi, and hi, Claude. Thank you so much for this talk. It was really fascinating. And maybe this is a question also for next session when you go through the process, so feel free to say if it's more relevant there, but what feels like it stands out to me in like making these projects real is the change in the finance and funding opportunities. And I just wondered if you could speak to that a bit more, and like, you know, the examples that you pointed to, what are the differences in like context now? And like, from my understanding of Russ, and you'll know so much more about this, but like, you know, that was intended to be self-build. And because of, I don't 100% know the pressures, but, you know, we have so much need for housing now. And so the quota for how much housing on that land needed to be increased. And so it turned into a more contractor-led development. Still huge benefits to it. But I just, you know, I wonder how we keep alive, and again, a bigger question, how we keep alive that like hope, hope for this kind of really long process of people organizing together through all of those adversities, and that kind of real people organizing stuff that often gets in the way. Loads of questions there.
Yeah.
But I wondered if you could speak to that.
Yeah, there's loads of questions there, and I do want to handle some of this in next week. But I think one thing that is evident, even this new government that has gone into place, one of the first things they said, they need to build 1.5 million homes. Straight away, they said it. They know they need to build 1.5 million homes. How they're going to fund that? I believe that social housing should be part of the infrastructure budget. It shouldn't be. They've got this supply and demand myth in England that the private sector should determine housing. And I think social housing housing for people that are not interested in buying a house. They're happy to be in a council house, happy to be in a house. I think that should be part of infrastructure, like they build roads, like they build hospitals, like they build schools. But not, right now it sits in the private sector. So that needs to change, number one. One of the things I'll talk about next week is I'm part of a group, government task force, that is lobbying, because it shouldn't take so long. If people can get land, then planning permission shouldn't take so long. So we're negotiating with Homes England to say to Homes England, ring fence a percentage of the annual housing budget to go to community-led housing. Then secondary, you need to ring, local authorities need to ring, so the different boroughs in London need to ring fence a certain amount of their annual budget that goes to local ideas and local housing initiatives. What I will say, and which I'll be pushing next week as one of the solutions, is the government a number of years ago said they created a community-led housing register. And each local authority has this register, but none of them are acting on it. So one of the things I want to do, I want to create a generational shift. We need to get as many of our young people, our people, going to local authorities, asking them, do they have a, or going online onto that local authority website, finding the self-build register and put their names on it. Because the only way we can turn this system around is showing numbers. If we can show numbers right across the UK of people wanting to do these types of projects, we can change policy. But we can't change policy because I accept everybody's got to work, they've got their children to look after, they've got certain things. So how do we shift the narrative? We shift the narrative by local authorities, wherever you live, having people, you know, when they turn around and say, wow, all of a sudden we've got 300 people on this right to build self-build register, where have they come from? That will shift the paradigm, that will move things on, and that will make it happen quicker. The funding, for me, they have to build these houses. They know they have to build these houses. The question is, if they're going to leave it to private developers to make massive profits, the private developers will take their time. We've seen, for example, over the last 10 to 15 years, where housing has been driven by student accommodation. Nearly every big city has seen the upgrowth of student accommodation. So most of the construction companies were getting big money for doing student accommodation. But all of a sudden, as the years are going past, you're seeing them shifting. Every town I go to now, they're starting to build houses again. They're starting to build houses on the edge of the city center. They're starting to build houses just outside the city. So there is a shift. There is a shift. We've just lost a government that, for all intents and purposes, was, let's not spend time on them, was wasting our time. We've got a new government that has to do new things to solve the existing problems. But we as a people, we have to also do something. So what I'm peddling, what I'm pushing is get in touch, get online, find out if your local authority has a self-build register or a right to build register. Get your name on that, get your friends' names on that, get your children's, get as many people, so systematically we can make inroads. I hope that answers your question, Miriam.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, and just points to like that this is not, as with many of these crises, like it needs to come from all angles.
Yeah.
So
we need. If we're just gonna, if you're in a line of 23,000 people, and we know, because I've noticed on this call, there's not many men on this call, and the people hardest to get accommodation systematically are single men. Young boys, single men are the hardest, but yet still they're not engaging with the system. to understand that they're the ones that can build. I'm not saying women can't build, but women can be, but they need to get on this message as well. So if you've got boyfriends, brothers, cousins, get them to put their names on this register. I'm hoping I can use these platforms to get that message out. We need more people signing on these registers. We need to prove that there is a need for this. And on the point of gentrification, I live in a city where Chapeltown's the area, and I still live here, where the majority of young people that were brought up in this area cannot even afford to rent property in this area now. They can't even afford to buy property in this area because of gentrification. Let me have a look here. Any other questions?
On that merry note, unfortunately, we have run over time. So I'm gonna have to stop you there. I know Sim had a question and a couple of other people in the chat / on the web, but as to respect everyone's time and not go over too much, we want to kind of wrap up and let you guys go. But I want to say a massive thank you and round of applause to Claude for all of the incredible info and question answering, and a massive congrats and whoop for all of you in the chat. I think it's so enriching when you're in a space where so many people have things to add to it and so many examples to bring to us. We don't just learn from one person, we learn from others, and we're all a mosaic of all the people that have ever loved us and ever imparted any sort of knowledge on us. So I just think, yeah, it's been so good to see you all engage in the chat as well. To kind of wrap up, for the people that did have questions, Rax is actually going to pop Claude's email in the chat box. If you'd like to ask from now between the next session, please do. The next session is actually on Wednesday, the 9th of October, same time, still online. I believe the link for this week is the same link for next week. Yes, Guppy's giving me the go-ahead, so you don't need to sign in again. So please do keep some of your questions for that, particularly if the next session talks more to what you wanted to ask. And there'll definitely be more of a Q&A segment in the next week, because we know that there's a lot to get through and a lot to ask. But on that, I want to say thank you all so much. I hope you have a glorious evening. I hope you enjoyed today. And yeah, continue to send this to friends, comrades, family members, siblings, the boys in your life, as Claude said. And yeah, long live the resistance, continue organizing, look after yourselves. And if we could get a collective heart on the screen, reactive heart, we can end on that. Thanks, everyone. Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
We'll probably stay on, as in me, Guppy, Claude, and Rax, but everyone feel free to leave. Enjoy your evenings. Happy day.
Claude, do you have a particular email? I know you've got a couple that you'd prefer contact on.
Yeah, Claude at leedscommunityhomes.org.uk. I did put it in the let's have a look here.
Go.
Yep.
Thank you. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I had a question too, but Sinead, if you want to go first.
Do you want to send it to Claude by email, just because it's late and it would be, is that all right? Are you able to make it next week?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah.
Is that good? Just to help us wrap up, it would be great.
Sure, of course we will.
Thanks, gang.
Amazing. I was I was gonna halfway pinpoint you to talk more, because I know you work in this sector. I know that there's not a lot of time, so obviously ask next week, but I'd love to hear more from you, because I was wow, you work in funding. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Anyway, I'll catch you next time.
Have a lovely
evening. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much. So sorry we couldn't get to your question as well. There were many.
Good.
See you later.
Hey Rex, we can stop the recording, I think.
Oh yes.
Let me just stop the recording.
really hope that that records the cloud. Because that would be so sad if it doesn't.
Let me find a way to end that because I can't seem to. Does anyone know how to end the recording?
Yeah, let me reclaim host and then I'll try and do it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.